This is Optimal Finance Daily, episode 1332, Reasons You Should Sell Your Investments by artofflexcents.com. And I'm your host and personal finance enthusiast, Diana Merriam. This is the show where I serenade you with the sweet sounds of personal finance knowledge from some of the best blogs on the planet, with the author's permission, of course. Do you have a question you'd like answered here on the show? Go ahead and send it over to finance@oldpodcast.com, and you just might hear from me soon. And before we get to it, have you subscribed to our other podcasts? We cover personal development and minimalism, health, relationships, entrepreneurship, and life advice on the other shows. Just search for Optimal Living Daily wherever you get your podcasts to find them. But since you're here, let's get right to today's post as we continue optimizing your life. Reasons You Should Sell Your Investments by artofflexcents.com. Warren Buffett has famously said that his holding period for his stocks is forever, but that doesn't mean he never sells. The goal is to invest long-term for optimal results instead of weaving in and out of the stock market. That being said, here are 5 reasons you should sell your investments from a long-term investor's point of view. Number 1. Your asset allocation is wrong. A great reason to sell your investments is that you discovered that your asset allocation does not align with your financial goals or your risk tolerance. Maybe you just recovered from a stock market crash, and whether or not you sold out of fear, it was too much for you to bear. Get it? If your initial allocation was way off, the only way to get it right within a reasonable time is to rebalance your portfolio. Hence, you'll need to sell one type of investment for the purchase of another. Was it a good asset allocation? For the simplicity of answering this question, let's just talk stocks and bonds. A good rule of thumb is using 120 minus your age. Based on this rule, if you're 30 years old, you should have 90% invested in stocks and 10% in bonds. If you're 60 years old, you should have 60% in stocks, 40% bonds. Bonds will reduce your volatility, but also your potential gains as well. Based on this rule, I should be 90% invested in stocks, but I'm very aggressive and have a high risk tolerance. That being said, both me and my wife's stock allocation is currently 100%. That means we feel both the full reward of a bull market, but also the full brunt of a stock market crash. We felt it for the first time when the stock market crashed 30% and we had to deal with losing $100,000. But we learned a lot about our risk tolerance. Thankfully, my wife and I survived our first bear market and learned how to be uncomfortable. Number 2, it's part of your plan. This reason is clearly the best reason to sell your investments. After all, when everything's going according to plan, it's hard to stress about it. The hardest part is sticking with it. If your plan is to withdraw $2,000 from your investments each month in retirement, it might be hard to continue doing that in a down market. The beautiful part of being in charge of your plan is that you can adjust the plan accordingly. For me, I don't plan on selling any of my investments unless I'm completing it as part of my tax loss harvesting strategy, capital gain harvesting strategy, or part of my drawdown plan. This is all outlined in my investment policy statement linked in this post. Number 3, the government forces your hand. What I'm talking about here are the required minimum distributions, or RMD. After you reach a certain age, the IRS requires you to withdraw a certain amount from your tax-deferred retirement accounts, which is your 401k, 457, solo 401k, or IRA. If you don't withdraw a defined amount that is set for you based on your balance and life expectancy, then you have to pay a 50% fee on the amount you were supposed to withdraw. Plus, you will still need to take that distribution. As part of this Setting Every Community Up for Retirement, which is the SECURE Act, which went into effect in January 2020, RMDs have been moved from 70.5 years old to 72 years old. Number 4, borrowing from your 401k. You are borrowing from your 401k as an emergency measure and have researched heavily into how to mitigate any consequences of it completely ruining your retirement plans. AKA, you know what you're doing. Then again, if you really knew what you were doing, you should have had a sufficient emergency fund in place to prevent yourself from taking such rash measures to begin with. Number 5, zombie apocalypse. As a long-term investor, the only other time you should sell your investments is due to an impending apocalypse, assuming you knew ahead of time where the money would actually be worth something. For example, if you had special intel about the government losing control of a vaccine for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, turning all exposed subjects into flesh-eating zombies, before the information becomes public, you could liquidate all of your money to expedite plans to fly you, your loved ones, and all necessary possessions to a secluded island. Conclusion. In summary, making big financial decisions like selling your investments due to fear or what the headlines are saying is never a good idea. These moves should be based on a plan that aligns with the investment strategy that you created when you weren't surrounded by economic doom. As a self-directed investor, I value simplicity because it makes consistency easy. I have laid out a set of rules that I follow based on what I read and what I believe will give me the best results. You just listened to the post titled Reasons You Should Sell Your Investments by Art of Flexcents.com. Something that stood out to me here in the beginning of the article, where Art talks about risk tolerance, is this idea of, and I'm using air quotes here, losing money in a stock market correction. If you're a long-term investor, and especially if you're in the accumulation phase of your financial journey, keep in mind that you're only losing money during a market correction if you sell. By holding through a correction, you're staying strapped into your seat on the roller coaster that is the stock market, so you can feel that wonderful breeze in your hair as the market climbs back up. I'm not planning to touch my investments for many years, so I've got a very high risk tolerance and I'm 100% invested in stocks. As I get closer into tapping into this money, I'll reallocate a certain percentage to bonds to dial down the volatility of my portfolio. If you don't plan on touching your investments for many years to come, a great way to manage your risk tolerance might be to just not watch the roller coaster. I think of my investments like I'm cooking a pot of rice. If I keep lifting up the lid to take a look at how the rice is progressing, I'm letting out the steam that is necessary for perfectly cooked rice. And that's a wrap for the Sunday show. Have a great rest of your day, a wonderful start to your month if you're listening in real time, and I'll be back tomorrow for the Monday episode where your optimal life awaits.